Alright guys, this is the video you've been waiting weeks for. The comparison between our 8-core 2025K iMac for $2,300 and the 10-core $3,300 model. And as you saw in the title, we are recommending that most people do not upgrade to the 10-core i9 CPU for an extra $400. There are a small amount of people who should upgrade, and I'll mention that in just a few minutes as we get deeper into our suite of performance tests, like video editing in Final Cut Pro 10, programming with Xcode, music production with Logic Pro 10, photo editing with Photoshop and Lightroom Classic, graphics rendering with Blender, gaming performance, and more. Before we get started, I want to show you guys the full specs of each machine. And one of the major differences is that the 8-core gets the base 5500 XT graphics card, and the 10-core gets the 5700 XT with double the VRAM. We also paid $100 for the optional 10GB Ethernet port on the high-end model, so if you don't need that port, the price goes down to $34.50. And by the way, those total prices you're seeing include the RAM that we bought from Amazon and upgraded ourselves for a significant discount instead of paying Apple's incredibly high RAM prices. So we got 32 gigs for the 8-core iMac for $120 and 64 gigs for the 10-core for just $240 off Amazon, and we'll have links to the RAM that we chose down in the description below so you can do the same. And if this video ends up helping you out, consider buying our Apple product merch like our mask or a t-shirt down below to help support this channel. Now let's get into the performance testing, starting with the Geekbench 5 benchmark. And in the single core test, there was barely any difference at all. But in the multi-core test, the 10-core i9 model was around 9% more powerful in terms of raw performance. Now in the Cinebench R20 CPU stress test, which actually factors in the cooling systems, the 10-core model was around 12% more powerful, which is honestly less of a difference than I was expecting since you're paying $400 for that CPU upgrade. But the most interesting thing is that during that test, the 8-core iMac was actually able to get a higher spike in wattage. And then once the temp stabilized after multiple runs of Cinebench R20, the 10-core was running at a lower clock speed of 4 GHz because it has to keep those extra cores cool. And this is going to be very important for some of the real-world tests that we're about to run in just a minute. But first, let's go through the graphics and the gaming tests. In Geekbench 5's Metal Graphics test, the 5700 XT graphics in the higher end model was about 38% more powerful than the 5500 XT, which is definitely a more impressive difference than we saw with the 10-core CPU. And then we ran Unigen's Heaven gaming benchmark on the Extreme preset to test the difference in real-world gaming performance. And to our surprise, the higher-end model got around 50% more FPS, which is an incredible difference for gamers, and definitely worth the upgrade price of $500. Now as a cherry on top, the 5700 XT gets double the VRAM, 16 gigs instead of only 8 gigs on the 5500 XT. And not only that, but the bandwidth speed is higher as well, 384 gigabytes per second instead of 224 on the base graphics, which is going to help a lot for some of the real-world graphics tests that I'm about to show you guys in a minute. But before we get into those video editing tests with Final Cut Pro 10, I want to cover some other things like photo editing, Logic Pro 10, and Xcode programming. We ran the Puget Bench Photoshop benchmark, and we were surprised to see that the high-end model only scored around 5% higher, even with the 10-core CPU and the extra RAM. So this shows that graphics designers should be fine with the lower end model. Now I tried to run Puget Bench for After Effects multiple times, but no matter what I did, it wouldn't finish the test. I don't know why. But with that, let's get into the Lightroom Classic testing, exporting 500 raw 42 megapixel images, and the higher end iMac finished exactly 2 minutes quicker, which isn't much, but it's definitely something. Now here's the kicker. In a previous video, we actually tested the differences in how much RAM you should buy, and while using the lower end 8-core iMac, we ran the same test with 64 gigs of RAM, and it finished in just 22 minutes and 10 seconds. So this not only shows how important RAM is for photo editing in Lightroom, but it shows that the 8 core is actually faster than the 10 core if both of them are using 64 gigs of RAM. And that's because the 8 core runs at higher clock speeds, like we saw in the Cinebench R20 test. Now, we also tested building one-to-one previews, and here the 10 core iMac was just 4 seconds faster than the 8 core, assuming both systems have 64 gigs of RAM. Now, moving on to the MaxTech Xcode benchmark, which you can download using the link below in the description, the 10 core iMac finished the build only 12 seconds faster than the 8 core. We personally think this is due to the fact that on the 10 core, Apple is limiting the maximum wattage and the clock speeds to help keep the temps down, while the 8 core feels like it's unlocked and free to get high spikes in wattage, which has been very impressive so far. And now moving on to the Logic Pro 10 benchmark, which tests how many tracks the system can handle before overloading, the 8 core was able to handle 123 tracks, and the 10 core was able to handle a slightly higher 131 tracks, which is once again pretty underwhelming. And honestly, most Logic Pro 10 users aren't maxing out their systems with as many tracks as possible, so the 8 core should really be fine for most people. And by the way, 64 gigs of RAM with the 8 core helped it handle 125 tracks instead of 123. Now, before we get started with video editing, we have just one more test to run, and that's 3D rendering with Blender's BMW and Classroom test, which are actually using the graphics to render instead of the CPU. In this test, the higher end model finished almost 40% faster than the base model, which is a pretty huge difference, and that performance gain is due to the 5700 XT's extra raw performance and core count. Now let's finally get into video editing with Final Cut, and prepare yourself because these results are insane. In the Bruce X 5K benchmark, the higher end model finished the test just 1 second faster than the lower end iMac. Then moving on to our 1-minute HEVC stabilization test, the difference was even smaller, with the high-end model finishing just half a second faster. Now, the reason for that is because both systems are using the same exact quick sync encoders and the same exact T2 chip to encode the HEVC footage in this test, so the extra raw performance doesn't really help. We then exported a 5-minute 4K H.264 clip, and once again, the higher end model only finished 1 second faster because the hardware accelerators are taking care of the encoding, so it's not limited at all by graphics power. So because we didn't see a difference in that test, we exported one of our very own MaxTech videos, which is 12 minutes long and comes packed with a bunch of effects and charts that we use on a daily basis. And here, the high-end model did finish 23 seconds faster, and we think it's because of the much faster 384GB per second VRAM bandwidth that is able to more quickly render the effects. Now moving on to our 5-minute HEVC export test, the high-end model finished just 12 seconds faster, which is honestly not much of a difference for paying an extra $500. And of course, that's because they both have the same T2 chip, which takes care of HEVC encoding. Now, what those tests show us is that if you're doing basic 4K editing, there's really no difference between the two. But as you start adding more and more effects, like we did in our 12-minute long MaxTech video, the higher end 5700 XT model will start to perform a bit faster. So keep that in mind if you're going to be adding a lot of effects. Now, getting into Canon's new EOS R5 footage, Max did a dedicated video on his channel for editing R5 and Sony a7S III footage, so definitely check that out after this video is over, but I do have a couple of tests to show you guys right now. In terms of transcoding a 30-minute 4K 10-bit clip, they basically finished in the same amount of time, with neither of the machines using all of their CPU power. So for this test, the 10 core is basically pointless. Now, instead of transcoding, we exported a 5-minute version of this footage, and you guys are about to have your minds blown. The 10 core iMac was slower than the 8 core iMac by about 8 seconds. And the only reason we could think of is that the 8 core is running at higher clock speeds. So if you want to see more info on that, definitely check out Max's dedicated video. Now moving on to Canon C200 RAW footage, Final Cut Pro just got updated to support metal-based rendering for this type of footage, but it's currently broken because Canon still hasn't updated their plugin. So we ended up using the old version of Final Cut to run our 5-minute export test, and here, the high-end iMac was almost 2 minutes faster. But the important thing to note is that the 8-core CPU is still not the limitation. The extra gains for the higher-end iMac are from the better graphics card. And as far as timeline smoothness, the high-end iMac was able to play it back at a perfect 60 frames per second, compared to around 54 FPS on the low-end iMac. So the graphics is a great investment here. Moving on to Red RAW Footage, now using the new Final Cut Pro version in Red's newly released plugin, we ran our 5-minute 4.5K export, and the high-end iMac was over 25% faster in this test. But not because of the 10-core CPU, mostly because of the faster graphics yet again. And now exporting our 5-minute 8K clip, the high-end iMac was way faster, almost 50% faster than the other iMac, which is very impressive. And you might be thinking, there you go, that's the 10-core CPU finally shining. But you're wrong. Max tested before and after the new Final Cut Pro update, and the high-end iMac used to export 4.5K Red RAW with 91% of the CPU being used, but now it went down to only 12% of the CPU being used. And for the 8-core export, it went from 100% CPU usage down to 12% CPU usage, with the graphics actually being basically maxed out at 98% usage. So this basically shows that in the past, Red RAW Footage would completely max out your CPU and make the 10-core way worth it. But now, it's mostly graphics based. So the 5700 XT is very worth it for doing any type of raw footage editing. And as for the 8K playback test, the high-end iMac played it back at 19 FPS out of 24, compared to only 12 FPS on the lower-end iMac. So this crazy 8K footage is still being limited by the best 5700 XT graphics option. Alright guys, so with all of those tests out of the way, we can safely say that the 10-core CPU is simply not worth the extra $400, even for the tasks that are purely processor-based, like Xcode, Logic Pro 10, Photoshop, and Lightroom Classic, which actually got slower with the 10-core CPU, assuming both machines have 64 gigs of RAM. Now, I'm not trying to say that the 10-core is bad. It's just that this year's 8-core i7 is insane. It's incredibly powerful, and it's not being limited like the 10-core is. Now, as far as all of the video editing tests, the high-end iMac was only faster because of the better graphics card. And we know this for sure because the 8-core CPU was not being maxed out in any of the tests. Even raw editing, which used to max out the processor. And since the 8-core was running at higher clock speeds, it could actually be even better for video editing, like we saw in the Canon EOS R5 footage test. So with all of that said, in the beginning of this video, I did mention that the 10-core is actually worth it for a small number of people, so let me explain. If you're the type of person who has too much money to even care about getting the best bang for your buck, and you want to squeeze out that extra 6 tracks in Logic Pro 10, 12 seconds of build time in Xcode, or 4 seconds for building one-to-one previews in Lightroom Classic, then sure, get the 10-core. But in my opinion, 100% of people should instead spend that $400 on either upgrading the graphics or something else like the storage. And with that, hopefully this video helps you out, and if it did, definitely check out our Apple product merch down below, like our mask, and definitely click the circle above for our upcoming 5K iMac versus 2019 Mac Pro comparison video. And for all of you Canon EOS R5 users, check out Max's video right over there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.